This training will provide an overview of suspension from Chapter 25, Serious Deficiencies, Suspensions, and Terminations. This video is presented by the Oregon Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs, also known as ODE-CMP. In this training, we will cover the background information for suspensions, including definitions of terms used in the suspension process, the federal regulations, and the reasons a sponsor may be suspended. Additionally, we will cover the steps of the suspension process. Once you are done with this training, you will know the reasons a sponsor's agreement may be suspended from operating the CACFP and gain a broad understanding of the CACFP suspension process. In the first section of this training, we will cover definitions of terms used in the suspension process, the federal regulations that requires the suspension process, and the reasons a sponsor may have their CACFP agreement suspended. We will start with some terms you will hear during this training and if you are going through the suspension process. Seriously deficient, commonly referred to as SD, is the status of a sponsor that has been determined to be non-compliant in one or more aspects of the program. Suspension means the status of an institution or daycare home that is temporarily ineligible for participation, including program payments. Proposed suspension, a formal notice from a state agency that a sponsor's agreement is being considered for suspension due to submission of a false or fraudulent claim. Proposed termination and disqualification, a formal notice from a state agency that a sponsor's agreement is being considered for termination and disqualification due to suspension. Termination, when an institution is removed from operating the CACFP and the state agency sponsor agreement is terminated. Disqualification, when an institution, a responsible principal or responsible individual, or daycare home is ineligible for program participation. National Disqualified List means the list, maintained by the USDA, of institutions, responsible principals, and responsible individuals and daycare homes disqualified from participation in the program. Institutions, which is the entity or organization that signs the agreement with the state agency to operate the CACFP. Responsible Principals, RP, which are the sponsor's authorized representative, food program coordinator, financial office representative, the institution's executive director, board chair, for-profit business owners, managers, officers, board members, and any other principals who were responsible for program operations or should have known about the cause of the suspension. Responsible Individuals, RI, which are non-principal individuals, including volunteers and contractors, associated with the institution's operation of the CACFP who bear some responsibility for a suspension. An RPI may be a current or former employee. Though no longer employed by the institution, an individual may still be responsible for the cause of the suspension by his or her actions prior to leaving the institution. ODE-CMP is required by federal regulation to have a suspension process. The key regulations are 7 CFR 226.6 C5. This regulation provides state agency requirements for suspension of an institution's participation. Under this regulation, there are specific requirements for when a state agency must propose to suspend a sponsor's participation and the steps that must be taken to ensure due process. And 7 CFR 226.6 C5 IIB. This regulation provides guidance for state agencies on proposed suspension notices and the information that must be included. Suspension would be applied by ODE-CMP pursuant to Section 226.6 C5II of the CACFP regulations. This section outlines the two serious deficiencies in which ODE-CMP would be required to suspend a sponsor's participation in the CACFP. Imminent threat to health or safety. If state or local health or licensing officials have cited a sponsor for a serious health or safety violation, the state must immediately suspend the sponsor's CACFP participation. Or, if ODE-CMP determines that there is an imminent threat to the health or safety of participants at a sponsor's site, or that the sponsor has engaged in activities that threaten the public health or safety, ODE-CMP must immediately notify the appropriate state or local licensing and health authorities and take action that is consistent with the recommendations and requirements of those authorities. Examples of imminent threat to health or safety include, but are not limited to, providing care for more children than the licensed capacity allows, lost or missing child, suspected maltreatment of a child, illness or injuries requiring hospitalization or emergency treatment, and unsanitary conditions for food service or unsanitary water. The second reason a sponsor may be suspended is false or fraudulent claims. If ODE-CMP determines that an institution has knowingly submitted a false or fraudulent claim, ODE-CMP may initiate action to suspend the sponsor's agreement and must initiate action to terminate the sponsor's agreement and initiate action to disqualify the sponsor and the responsible principals and responsible individuals. ODE-CMP is required to disallow the false or fraudulent claims. It is time for a knowledge check. Which of the following is a reason ODE-CMP will suspend a sponsor's participation in the CACFP? A. A sponsor is declared seriously deficient for repeat meal pattern findings. B. During a review, ODE-CMP determines that a sponsor did not permanently correct a previous serious deficiency. C. ODE-CMP determined that the sponsor miscalculated when consolidating a monthly claim and inadvertently overclaimed by 5 lunches. D. During a review, ODE-CMP reviewers identify an imminent health and safety issue. The answer is D. ODE-CMP will immediately suspend a sponsor's participation in the CACFP if an imminent threat to health and safety is identified. In the next section of this training, we will cover the suspension process. This includes notification. Sponsors will either receive a notice of serious deficiency, suspension, and proposed termination and disqualification, or a notice of serious deficiency, proposed suspension, and proposed termination and disqualification, depending on the situation. The notice is followed by the appeal process, if the sponsor elects to appeal. Next, the sponsor has the opportunity to submit corrective action. Finally, the process ends with either the sponsor's termination and disqualification or deferment and reinstatement of program participation. The first step of the process is to notify the sponsor, responsible principals, and responsible individuals of the suspension or proposed suspension. In the case of imminent threats to health and safety, ODE-CMP will immediately suspend the sponsor's participation in the CACFP and issue a combined notice of serious deficiency, suspension, and proposed termination and disqualification. This renders the sponsor temporarily ineligible to participate in the CACFP, including program payments, and declares the sponsor seriously deficient. The notice will include the serious deficiencies found, that the institution can appeal the suspension and the proposed termination and disqualification, that the institution's program participation, including all program payments, are suspended with a specific start date until an appeal is concluded, that ODE-CMP is prohibited from offering an appeal of the suspension prior to the suspension being effective, that unless overturned by a review official, the suspension will remain in effect throughout the serious deficiency process, that if the hearing official overturns the suspension, the institution may claim reimbursement for eligible meals served during the suspension, that termination from the program will result in placement of the institution and RPIs on the NDL, and that the institution's voluntary termination of its agreement with ODE-CMP after having been notified that it is seriously deficient and suspended from the program will still result in the institution and RPI's formal termination by ODE-CMP and placement on the NDL. The notice must include ODE-CMP CACFP appeals procedures. In the case of a false or fraudulent claim, ODE-CMP may propose to suspend the state agency agreement with the sponsor. The sponsor is not immediately suspended and has 10 days to request a suspension review of the proposed suspension before the suspension goes into effect. The notice will include the serious deficiencies found, the ODE-CMP is proposing to suspend the institution's and RPI's program participation, including the payment of claims, the effective date of the suspension. This cannot be earlier than 10 days after the institution receives the notice, that the institution can appeal the proposed suspension, the contact information for the suspension review official, that a suspension review must be requested within 10 days of receipt of the notice, that if the hearing official overturns the proposed suspension, the institution may claim reimbursement for eligible meals served during the proposed suspension, and that the institution's voluntary termination of its agreement with ODE-CMP after having received the notice will still result in the institution and RPI's formal termination by ODE-CMP and placement on the NDL. The notice must include ODE-CMP CACFP appeals procedures. ODE-CMP is prohibited from paying any claims for reimbursement submitted by a suspended institution. However, if the institution suspended for the submission of false or fraudulent claims is a sponsoring organization of unaffiliated sites, ODE-CMP must ensure that sponsored facilities that are unaffiliated with the sponsor continue to receive reimbursement for eligible meals served during the suspension period. If the suspended institution prevails in the administrative review of the proposed termination, the ODE-CMP must pay any valid unpaid claims for reimbursement for eligible meals served and allowable administrative costs incurred during the suspension period. A suspension review is available to institutions before a suspension for submission of false or fraudulent claims takes effect. It consists of a review of written documents instead of an in-person hearing to determine whether program payments will continue. It does not resolve any appeal option that the institution may request of ODE-CMP's proposed termination and disqualification of the institution. The institution may request a regular appeal if they are dissatisfied with the result of the suspension review. If an institution wants a suspension review, it must send a request to the suspension review official within 10 days of receipt of the notice of proposed suspension. The appeal request should include the reasons the institution disagrees with the proposed suspension. The institution may submit documentation to support its appeal. The suspension review official must be an individual who is independent and impartial. ODE-CMP must be notified immediately of the institution's request. ODE-CMP must provide the suspension review official with the original proposed suspension and any other supporting documentation. The suspension review official must render a decision within 10 days of the deadline for receiving the institution's documentation opposing the suspension. The maximum time for suspension of a participation is 120 days following the suspension review decision. The institution also has the right to appeal the suspension and proposed termination and disqualification due to imminent threat to health and safety or false or fraudulent claims through the regular appeal process, regardless of whether it requests a suspension review. Within 120 days, the institution's appeal should be heard by an independent and impartial hearings official, and a decision rendered either overturning the suspension and proposed termination and disqualification, or the institution and RPIs should be terminated. More information about the appeal process is available in the Chapter 26, the Appeal Process Training. Whether or not the institution is successful in its suspension appeal, the institution has the opportunity to submit corrective action to address the serious deficiency determination. If the institution's corrective action is accepted by ODE-CMP, the serious deficiency is temporarily deferred, the suspension is removed, and the institution is able to continue participation in CACFP with resumed payments. If the corrective action is not accepted, ODE-CMP must continue with the proposed termination and disqualification of the institution and the RPIs. An institution may be reinstated if they prevail in their appeal hearing or if submitted corrective actions are accepted by ODE-CMP. The sponsor, responsible principals, and responsible individuals may continue to participate in the CACFP and other child nutrition programs if this occurs. If a sponsor, responsible principal, and/or responsible individual does not submit an appeal or loses an appeal, ODE-CMP will proceed with termination and disqualification. Termination and disqualification from participation in the CACFP will result in the institution, its responsible principals, and responsible individuals being prohibited from participation in the CACFP or the Summer Food Service Program and other sponsoring organizations. The institution, the responsible principals, and the responsible individuals are placed on the National Disqualified List, which is maintained by USDA, disqualifying all those listed from participation in the program anywhere in the United States for 7 years or until removed from the list by USDA. If an outstanding debt is owed to ODE-CMP, the debt must be repaid before a disqualified institution, responsible principal, or responsible individual can be removed from the National Disqualified List. In this training, we covered the background information for suspensions, including definitions of terms used in the suspension process, the federal regulations, and the reasons a sponsor may be suspended. Additionally, we covered the steps of the suspension process. ODE supports equity and excellence for every learner. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. Thank you for taking this training.